Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Paes.
And today we are talking about the way your personality type may be limiting your career path in ways you don't see.
Yeah, the Enneagram types impact everything in our lives. And career is something super important for everybody. Even for people who are not formally working, because, for instance, we see so many people who learn the Enneagram and want to spread it to others. And in a way, that is a career. You know, there are many kinds of careers. So I think people who are in business will really appreciate this podcast, but not only them. Career for everybody is something useful. And many times it's connected to that sense that I need to achieve my purpose in life. So this is why we chose this theme.
Exactly. And everyone wants to be able to achieve success in whatever way they want to in the work they do, whether it's doing work that has meaning and purpose, or, supporting your family, or surviving, or doing well in terms of material resources, whatever way you might define success in your work and your career. It's important to be able to step back and envision what you really want for yourself and find ways to get to where you want to go. I always love what the coach and author Marshall Goldsmith said about why we do leadership development work. What got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people in their work kind of keep doing the same thing over and over again. And they have their ways that their type-based patterns may constrain their career possibilities in ways they remain unconscious to, because all of our patterns constitute blind spots in many ways. So we thought it would be great to talk about each of the 9 types in terms of, on the one hand, tendencies and challenges when it comes to career planning, career development, charting a path forward in your work, and taking that path to get somewhere, and the growth opportunities that each type can have when they stop and really get more conscious about what their tendencies and challenges are when it comes to career, so that they can be successful in the ways that they might want to be.
Right. And we want to start very quickly with the types. I just want to make one last comment before we do that. We sometimes say that a paradox is that each of the 9 types ends up getting the thing that they try to avoid the most in life. And it's not different in career. So typically each type wants something in career, but they end up getting the opposite. And this is another reason why it's good to pay attention to the career patterns we're going to say, so that you really make sure that you're doing the right things for your not always conscious, true willingness. So should we start with the 9 types?
Yes, I think we should. And let's start, as we usually do, with type 8.
Fantastic. Would you start?
Sure. And I want to say before we start that this is actually a particular specialty of yours. I work with leaders and teams as well as you do, but you've worked with them much longer than me, and you've thought a lot about this. So I just want to give you some credit here, because what we're going to be talking about is based on some information that you've really generated over time. And I've been working with this more lately, but recently I interviewed you, and then I kind of added my own thoughts. But I really want to give you credit, because this is a particular area that you've thought about a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
But I'll start with type 8, and so I will first say that I think that 8s tend to focus a lot on power, on getting somewhere, on the big picture. And so they may go for what we might call vertical achievement. Like, how do I go up the ladder? How do I gain more power? And again, we often say too that 8s don't necessarily need to be the leader, right? 8s are stereotyped sometimes as always wanting to be the boss. But really, eights can be okay if other people are in charge and doing well. It's just that when someone's leading and doing a bad job, they can want to, move in and have a more positive influence over what's happening. But they do tend to think, I think, in terms of short term vertical advancement and what's the next step up the ladder,
Yeah.
where they can be in charge and have an impact and be someone who's a big part of tackling the big challenge that needs to be tackled.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with this. And I think that not always the eight asks themselves if they want that career path. There is a lot of self-forgetting in it's a self-forgetting triad, the body triad, and they just go for feeling the void of power wherever it is, and they not really pay attention if that's what they need, and if they're not happy, they don't have as much motivation, they deny it, they simply don't see it, right? And another thing is the eights sometimes in new organizational models, they are not as valued as before. In the more dry side of eights or unconscious sides of dealing with power, as in being managers and not exactly leaders. So I think that in the past, eights had a little bit, not much, more opportunities that they have today. It's changing. But eights also adapt. It's a myth that they don't adapt. So I've been seeing many aides that I help in organizations that they actually learn how to play the corporate game, and they don't act as the typical aides at work, but then they exaggerate even more at home in that eightness that we are used to, because it's very hard for aides to self-control.
Mhm. Right, right.
Yeah,
And I think often eights that don't do more conscious career planning can end up working really, really hard. And as
yeah,
you said, not stepping back to say, what do I really need and want? What is really good for me on a self care level or on a level of being fulfilled? It's more they can move forward, it's more they can move toward the challenge
yeah.
or the big job or the powerful opportunity, and not always stop to think if it's something that they really want that's really going to serve them in the long run.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. I Another thing I usually see for eights is that they are the ones that transform realities at work, meaning that they break away from uh, old paradigms or things that are not working. They 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 change what's old and bring up the new. But many times that hurts their career paths right after, because they leave damage in their way of doing that. And they are seen as the ones who destroy, but not necessarily the ones that build right after. Sometimes I've seen aides doing that job, and then when everything was okay, they were sent to do that same job in another company, another department, like for instance turnarounds in companies. So that is a little sad, because unless the aide is really on ego and will be happy with that, that won't add to the aide's self-development.
Right, right, exactly. And so they can do the dirty job
Yeah,
that no one else wants to do or has the strength or courage to do,
yeah,
and yet not realize what the impact is on them.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think sometimes they can take on too much stress and it can affect them physically.
right,
And that can be a negative side effect
yeah,
of the tendency to work too hard or to be too ambitious or to go for the power and the tough
yeah,
job, and not see things in a bigger picture in terms of what
right,
works for them.
yeah.
So, what are some some growth opportunities that eights can be aware of when it comes to being more conscious about career planning and career development or professional development?
I think that waiting a day or two when they get career opportunities instead of saying yes right away, and questioning if they really want that, if they are happy indeed with what is being offered for them. And another thing is going a bit more for people management, where they can develop themselves in a softness in approaching others, and not only being the ones in charge of the business, the hard business side, or just a technical side of things. So I think that when our career path is connected to our personal growth, work becomes a place of self-development, and that's what we should look for.
Right. They can find managerial positions that help them become more approachable,
Yeah,
be develop connections with people,
yeah,
to broaden their skill set in terms of what they're good at.
yeah,
And I also think it's important for them to um, recognize that there may be a blind spot to getting support themselves.
yes,
They can be very good at like supporting their team or
yeah,
mentoring others, but what supports them
yeah,
and being open more to what they can do in their work
yeah,
that feeds them, that nourishes them. In some ways, it's a variation on the theme that we often hear for AIDS. It's getting more in touch with the softer side, the vulnerability,
yeah,
and
yeah,
making sure you really check in and say, what do you need and want, and how can you be supported?
yeah, I fully agree.
So, shall we talk about type nines?
Sure.
So, why don't you start this one? What do you think some of the tendencies and challenges are that nines face when they're navigating their career path?
I think the main one is that nines end up not focusing on their career development at all. They play it's not play safe, it's more like they forget about their own ambition, and they don't go dream bigger, they don't aim high. And when people praise them, could be in performance appraisal cycles, or also just doing career planning, they don't they don't really put themselves as big candidates unless they are doing inner work, like going for it. So many times nines, I see nines, unfortunately, who are the best candidates in practice for a career move up in the vertical ladder, but the way they behave towards that makes others think that they are not as interested, or that it will be okay with them if they are not the ones who are chosen.
Right, right. They don't prioritize themselves when it comes to their own
Yeah,
professional development. They can focus more on supporting others in
yeah,
their professional development or helping other people in their careers,
yeah,
and not have enough ambition, not focus on self-promotion. I think it can feel
yes,
uncomfortable for nines to get any kind of attention. And if you're really putting yourself in the middle of your own work story, it can mean, you need to show up and put yourself out there and express opinions or go
yeah,
for things in a less passive way than I think nines are used to doing,
yeah,
when they just sort of are in default mode and
yeah,
may want to stay more comfortable.
right, yeah. And I think that one of the ways out of this trap is that nines look at the injustice of what's happening if they are not getting that, because looking at injustice sometimes is a bit easier for nines than looking at their own interests.
Yes, it's like they need to look at the downside of just going with the flow
Also, that,
and
yeah,
what they may lose out on. And I like the word injustice. The way others may get promoted when they don't, because they have a mindset that they're
mm,
not as important. And again, it's this default mode they may not even think about. But it's hard for nines to see themselves as the person that should initiate something, and especially when it comes to their own
Mhm.
path forward in life.
And I think you talked about an important item here, which is the lack of self promotion. I want to say that I saw in my life so many nines that said the people they hated the most were the show offs, the
Mm,
ones that self promote too much. And I think that is a little bit of a bias for nines,
yeah.
because it would really help them if they showed off a little bit more.
Yes, yes, exactly. And overall, I would say nines are good at planning and process and structure and how you might move something forward in good ways, but they don't apply that to themselves.
Yeah.
They don't think of utilizing their own gifts for planning and process with themselves in mind. It's sort of the center of their own story.
Yeah, and I think that talking about opportunities for career path for nines, one opportunity is getting in touch with the anger of not getting to the career point that you think you deserve, or doing the things that you feel like you need to do, or just looking at other people who are actually less than you and have progressed in the career faster than you. So, as for so many other things in the nine's personal growth journey, there is a need to get in touch with a little more anger.
Yes. And there's also a need to get support. Nines are so good at supporting others, but they don't often proactively ask for support for themselves. So it can be really important for them to proactively make a plan and get help with that plan. In other
Yeah,
words, they need someone to give them feedback.
right.
It's hard for them to see their own strengths, their own power, uh, maybe things they should be angry about, injustices that may be happening with them. So they need to ask people
Yeah,
to hold up a mirror and
yeah.
to give them ideas about a plan that they might make for
And
themselves.
that is important also for an additional reason. It's that sometimes nines get in touch with some anger and what's not happening, then they decide to go for it. But a couple of weeks later, they lose that energy of going ahead with that thought. It's almost like they forget again. So, having a plan or having someone helping you is an additional guarantee so that you don't forget and you don't lose the energy to go ahead prioritizing yourself.
Right. And if nines can get in touch with some anger around any injustices happening, it might be good for them to really watch out that they don't go passive with that anger.
Yes.
Because when they get passive aggressive about maybe not getting what they deserve,
Right.
they can, in some ways, get stubborn and stand in their own way even more. And so it can be really important for them to be a little more active in the way they channel their anger into taking action on their own behalf.
Yeah. And one last thing from me, nines are a very modern kind of leader when it comes to most leadership models that are talked about today. For instance, leadership. But they do that too much. And this means that they put themselves in a position of helping too many other people, and they need to do work a little bit more for themselves. They need to develop, it's not selfishness, but a little bit more of an individualistic stance to what they do. A little bit, not much.
Yes, and one last thing from me is that I would say they should notice when they don't stop to think of options for themselves.
Mm,
They can be so adaptable.
yeah,
It's a little bit like, oh, I'll just do what's needed of me as
yeah,
opposed to what I want to do. And of course,
right.
it's hard for nines to know what they want, but it's really important when it comes to the work they do, uh, and sort of fulfilling their own needs and purposes
Yeah,
in life, that they stop to really think like, I know I could do many things,
yeah,
but what
yeah.
do I really want to do?
Yeah, and they get carried away by career opportunities without necessarily staying with what they really want and being strategic and affirming what they want.
Right, right. And nines say sometimes they know more what they don't want. So maybe it's making a list of what you don't want to get to what you want.
Exactly.
So, type ones, let's talk about tendencies and challenges when it comes to career possibilities with type one. So, I would say, and again, I think I've seen this, but you've also described this really well, and that is that ones have a hard time delegating. They can have a hard time seeing others as being able to do something as well as they can. And so they may make themselves difficult to replace in the positions they're in because they raise the standards. They don't delegate as much. It's almost like they become too valuable in a position. And so it can be hard for them to move up or to move on because there's no succession planning or there's no one to fulfill the role that they do in the way that they do it.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot in my own career as a consultant. Two other things about ones. I think this is one of the types that tends the most to become more technical and to stick with a particular technical job, which is completely fine if you are in an organization that offers career and salary progression in the technical side. However, at times it's a good thing for the one's self development to progress in their career a little bit more in the leadership side. And when they do that, they need to learn how to be more flexible because, progressing as leaders means not overseeing all the work that's happening, being a bit more generalistic, becoming aware that there will be more mistakes being made in your field of action, and also that you won't be able to correct everybody's mistakes or your own. You don't have time. You need to go a little bit more for the good and not the optimum. So I think that in a way, going for a leadership path for once is nice, and they also will need to self-criticize less when that happens.
Right. And I think ones can be the type that sees the big picture the least, especially
Yeah.
where their own path is concerned.
Mm.
They can get stuck by looking at the short term or the next project or getting too lost in the details and getting everything right. And so they don't remember to step back and dream a little bit,
Yeah.
allow themselves to really think about what has meaning for me. What do I want to do, not what I should do
Right.
or what the company needs me to do or what I'm doing to be a responsible person.
Right.
It's like they need to really make a point of
Mm.
stopping and stepping back and allowing themselves to look at the big picture in
Right.
terms of what's possible, not just what they need to do to serve the next project being as good as it can be.
I agree with that. And I think ones delay their career progress sometimes when they forget to manage their own image, and also when they don't focus as much in the relationship side at work, and at times they don't focus on becoming one of the coolest people around,
Hmm.
because that in practice helps bring people career opportunities. You know how easy people are to relate with. Like, why do you as a one need to put yourself always in that position of being the one who brings up things that don't really make people happy,
Right,
right?
right. It's the challenge of learning to be more flexible because,
And positive.
yeah, being responsible is important, but learning to accept things, learning to be easy to work with, learning to be more adaptable to different kinds of things you might be able to do
Yeah.
that you might like more than the thing that you're doing.
Hmm. Yeah. What else did you think is something important in the one's career path?
Well, I think in terms of growth opportunity, I think making sure they're doing the conscious work of channeling their anger more,
Hmm.
because I think if they aren't aware of their anger, as many ones tend not to be, and especially at work, ones can think, well, it's inappropriate to be angry. And it's not really about expressing anger so much as it is being aware of it
Mm.
and noticing how it might leak out and how you may get stuck in resentment, or, and this goes to the relationship building part, but also just the um, seeing the big picture part as well, in terms of how you may thwart yourself unconsciously as a one when you act on resentment or you hold on to situations where you felt wronged,
Mm.
instead of doing the work of noticing what your anger is about as a source of information about
Right.
what doesn't feel good to you, what you need.
Yeah.
Because ones can tend to not be very much in touch with their emotions and their deeper needs. They just go for doing their duty and being the most
Right.
responsible person around. And that often doesn't serve themselves. So they may need to think of many different paths forward and allow
Yeah.
themselves to think of different options
Right.
and see how they feel about that, and recognize times when their anger may be actually holding them back in their relationships and
Yeah.
also in their career trajectory.
Right. Good point. Uh, I want to speak about the first thing we said, which is the fact that once create a situation that makes them stay stuck where they are and not progress in their career. What happens at times, in my experience, is that ones end up doing the job that others are not doing or are doing wrong or not as well as they can do. So if ones don't do that, I always see that they get more career opportunities, because that at times is a trap. Instead of developing the other person so that the person stays more technical, and as a person developer you become more of a leader,
Mm-hmm.
uh, if you don't do that, you create more career opportunities for you.
Right, right. Which of course is also about developing your ability in connecting with people,
Yeah,
and seeing yourself as a good manager if that's something that you want to do, and
yeah.
owning the positive can be hard for ones. And so
Mhm.
owning what you're good at and more shades of what you're good at, and
Yeah.
to and developing more skills that will fulfill you and not just doing what's needed.
Right, and I really like to suggest studies of coaching for ones who want to develop their careers, so that they become more like leaders and less the old fashioned managers that just supervise and just make sure that people go do stuff in the right way.
And when you said that, you made me think of something. I think ones are the people that won't necessarily seek out a coach.
Yeah,
However, they really benefit from coaching,
yeah.
because there's a lot, when I coach ones, there's a lot of things I reflect back to them that they're really surprised by.
Mm.
Like, well, why wouldn't everyone want to do things this right way, or do things 100%, or meet this high standard, or but when you can show them a different side, often they get it and they make a lot of use of that,
Yeah,
sort of seeing things from different perspectives,
right,
and being able to see how they can get stuck in negative cycles when they're looking at what's wrong, or getting caught up in criticism or self-criticism, and helping them sort of create sort of positive upward spirals in
right,
terms of seeing what's working well, and
right, right.
congratulating themselves
Yeah.
for wins.
So I think it's both getting a coach for you if you're a one, and becoming more of a leader coach yourself.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about type 2.
Yeah, I think you should start with this one.
Well, I think one of the most obvious things is twos can focus a lot on relationships at work. In fact, they can see work and tasks through the lens of relationship, and so they can stop themselves and their forward momentum in their career when they do things more in terms of like staying connected to someone they like, or working for a boss that they feel good with and
Yeah,
that affirms them. It's like, well, I need to stay connected to this one person because that's the source of my career success,
yeah,
or feeling good at work, or feeling good about myself. And so they can limit themselves by not only staying with people they feel good about, but also staying with people who want them to stay in a particular role.
Yeah.
Um, and so do things more based on what other people want instead of what they need.
Yeah, interesting. I want to mention a concrete example of a Chew that I helped recently with some career management. This Chew is a manager in one organization, and he had changed to another organization. In the first organization, he knew everybody and people loved him, which is usually what Truth try to do, right? He had spent a lot of time doing that and he had succeeded. But then he got a new career opportunity, which was better, faster growth, and better salary in another organization. Only that he didn't knew people, and people who had been working together for a long time were in there, and it was a bit harder for him to be liked as
Mm.
quickly.
Yes.
But the career opportunities he had in that second place were uncomparable, much better. And then he was in this big dilemma of coming back. He would be downgraded if he did, because he had been promoted for the second company, and but yet he wanted to do that because he was liked in the previous one.
Yeah.
And it was just taking a little bit more time for him to be liked in the other one. It was not
Right.
that he wasn't being liked,
Right.
but he wasn't dealing better with that.
Yeah. It's like it's hard to tolerate
Yeah,
people not liking you.
right.
And sometimes that means, like, if you're the boss, delivering hard news
Yeah,
or constructive feedback to people. And sometimes that's part of the job and
yeah,
it's part of what makes you a good leader and helps you move forward. And yet, twos can unconsciously or consciously hold back on that,
right.
and out of
Yeah.
fear of not being liked. So that need to be liked can really be an issue. Also, I would say another thing is getting caught up in roles where you feel important because you're supporting other people,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, I'm the supporter and no one else can do it the way I can do, or feeling a good feeling about being indispensable in a particular position. And so having resistance to moving on from that position because, well, I'm needed here and I'm indispensable. And again, as a two, I always like to point out, not all twos like want to be needed, because
Mm-hmm.
that can be exhausting, but it is a good feeling when someone says you're
Yeah.
indispensable, like no one else could take your role. And so
Yeah.
you can get attached to that, the pride that goes along with being the one that's the hero, or being the person who is supporting people in a way that no one else could. And that can, you can get sort of stuck in
Yeah.
being too, feeling too good about that.
Right. So some Jews can resist getting specialized in an area of an area of learning or work, uh, and they differently. They just stick with the people that they work with, and they develop long-term relationships with those people. But then their careers get limited by what's happening with the careers of those other people, because it's like going together with them.
Right.
You
And
know.
I also think that it's important to differentiate subtype here
Yes,
with
a
twos,
lot. Yeah.
because social twos can be really focused on their
Yeah.
career.
Substantially more ambitious.
It's definitely an ambitious leader type, someone who is oriented toward power and influence and can be motivated by that. Sometimes I see social twos not going for the top job, but going
Mhm.
for
The
sort of
second.
the second
No,
job, but
yeah,
pretty powerful, but the powerful person behind the leader.
yeah.
Sometimes they can be the leader. Sometimes they have a hard time working for other people and start their own companies and want to be their own boss. And I think all twos can feel that a little bit. It's twos are not so known for not wanting to go with the authority, but it can be a little hard in terms of the pride to always have to do what others want you to do. And so I do think sometimes twos can get tired of having to support people all the time, and they can go it on
Mhm.
their own,
Yes.
which isn't always a bad thing, but it's sometimes a way of not doing the relationship work that's good for twos around saying more what you need, not always being the one who's supporting, not always being the one that has to be liked or affirmed by others, like
Yeah.
doing things that create a little bit of disapproval, but in service of an important goal or what's good for the team or the organization.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a blind spot for choose to see how they create dependency on them and
Right.
how they depend on other people depending on them.
Right.
And that can derail career, although this is a little bit more a leadership issue, but also in career wise, that can lead to some decisions or lack of decisions by the true person.
Right. And speaking of lack of decisions, talking about
Mhm.
the self preservation two can sometimes have a hard time owning their power.
Yes.
And so they can stay stuck in doing something that's comfortable or easy or with a boss they like, or
Yeah.
they makes them feel special, and not always really recognize what they need to develop in themselves to step more into their authority, to
Mhm.
be the person who is more powerful. It can just feel sort of alien. And I know this
Mhm.
from myself, to be the one. And it can be hard to really develop strength, become more of a grown up, and do some of the hard things
Yeah.
that we need to do at work
Yeah.
sometimes, like have conflicts with people or confront difficult situations or be unpopular.
Mhm.
But it's really good, of course, when twos can do these things in the service of what they need and having a larger vision for themselves than they might have when they just focus on relationships or some of their comfortable strengths, like
Mhm.
supporting others and being the person behind the throne.
Right, and also for choose an opportunity is think a bit more objectively and perhaps rationally about what is really better for your career, and not only what will bring you a more immediate emotional satisfaction.
Right.
So that is a blind spot,
Yeah,
right?
don't do things just based on emotion or how you feel in the moment,
Yeah.
or what you're afraid of,
Mhm.
or what you might do that will bring you away from someone you don't like, or make you have to work with someone you don't like for a while. I think don't base your decisions too much on
Yeah.
emotion. Step back, look at the big picture,
Pros and cons.
pros and cons, see, and ask yourself, what do you really need and want, and how are you going to get there. And of course, maybe a little bit like nines, getting support and
Yeah.
mirroring and reflection from other people about what you do well that you may
Yeah.
not be owning.
Perhaps a support from a mental type person.
Yes, because we're not big planners. I mean, I always had a sense for myself, I would choose a general direction but not always make a plan or have a goal.
Right.
Hi. If you're enjoying the depth of knowledge offered in this podcast, you might want to stay in touch with us. Beat and Uranio offer professional Enneagram training, personal development courses, self-guided online courses, and they even have a membership platform with over 100 hours of content. Head to cpenneagram.com/podcast to learn more.
What about threes, B?
So I think threes, there's a lot of things that came up in my mind as I thought about threes, because I think threes are kind of work focused and career focused. But I would say that in an interesting way, threes have some tendencies and challenges that we might not think of when we think of as three, because we tend to think of threes as, oh, they're good at sort of moving up the career ladder or focusing on their career in a way that brings them success. And while that's true, they may have certain blind spots. For instance, they may get really impatient if they don't
Yeah.
get a promotion in a short time frame.
Yes.
They may really see the next immediate goal and really want to go for that and make it happen very quickly. And if it doesn't, they can get frustrated. They can want to leave.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they don't think in longer time frames. They don't think, where do I want to be in 5 years, and then kind of come back from that in a more expansive view. They can really just think in terms of short-term goals that will make them look good.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I've seen this a lot in my life when it comes to threes. Another thing that I see happening with threes in career is that they really go for challenges. Career opportunities that involve challenges can be a startup, can be an area that is not performing as it should, so they go for it because it's challenging. But whenever the challenge is met and things are just okay and they could relax a bit, they lose motivation and they want to go for another challenge. But sometimes that takes away from them both the opportunity to have a better time and enjoying the good, positive consequences of the hard work done, and an opportunity for just relaxing a little bit and slowing down pace a bit.
Right. It's like they don't allow themselves to enjoy their success when they meet a
Exactly.
goal and hang out there for a while. It's like
Right.
they're thinking about the next move they want to make.
Yes.
And it's interesting because they can be surprisingly inflexible when
Yeah.
it comes to career, because they're looking at the optics, or
Right.
they're looking at the next vertical move
Yeah.
and not thinking about the horizontal move,
Yeah.
or something that could be more fulfilling or more interesting or speak to them at a deeper level, because they can tend to think in terms of the organizational chart and
Right.
and what will make them look more successful
Yeah.
versus what will be, like, as you said, sort of interesting, or what will speak to them in terms of having a deeper value or meaning or purpose.
Yeah, so when threes look to what will be more valued, they usually are not asking themselves, what do I really want? Right? That becomes a blind spot. They don't ask this question.
And they may not know what they really want,
Mm.
because sometimes they push away their feelings to do so much work, and our feelings are one of the ways that we know what we want and what we value, what's important to us. I also think that they can adapt too much to a situation or a boss that's not serving them,
Mm.
right? So
Yeah.
they can stay in a situation and maybe just sort of put their head down and keep working really hard,
Mm.
and not step back and say, wait a minute, I'm exhausted by this, or wait a minute, I'm not really doing what I want to be doing.
Mhm.
They just get lost in the to-do list, or what they need to do to keep adapting,
Right.
or doing what the ambitious thing is to do.
Yeah, and the adaptation thing and shape shifting that you were mentioning. I saw a three recently who got a promotion to a position that he had to act like an eight. And he, it was a business inside the larger business that had problems. And the briefing for him as the new leader and CEO of that was, you need to really act harsh with everything. And he did that. But after a couple of years, having got good but not exceptional results, he was completely worn out, because that person in particular had a slightly better level of awareness than other threes, and he sensed that he was going against the fact that he's actually an emotional person, and he had to treat people in ways that went against his ideals of how to deal with people. So sometimes the unconscious, immediate shape shifting put threes in positions that harm their actual nature of being emotional. And that needs to be taken into account when it comes to career.
Right. And they can end up really not being strategic.
Yeah.
It's like they get very operational, or they get focused so much on doing that they don't step back and think, oh, what's the best strategy in the long run. And also they can get so focused on short-term goals, and they can sort of run over people who may be obstacles to those goals, or alienate people
Right.
when they get in their way somehow.
Yeah.
And those people may be people they need to develop good relationships with,
Yeah.
that would help them, again, have a more satisfying growth path
Yeah.
or career path, as opposed to just one that's sort of more obviously a vertical ascension.
I agree. And some people end up seeing threes as being way too ambitious and dangerous when it comes to how they manage their careers.
Yes, I've coached leaders who get really frustrated with the threes that work for them because they're so focused on upward mobility.
Yeah.
They're not just sinking into doing the job they are doing in a good way because they're always trying to get something somewhere else or worrying about what they're looking like and not really being with what's happening or what they need to do, both in relationships and the work product they're producing.
Right. Anything else about threes, or would you like to move on to fours?
I think it's important, just a couple last things, for them to really get in touch with what they really want. And it can be hard, but it's like they need to open up a process. I think it's also good for them to think about work-life balance.
Yeah,
I've coached a lot of threes that get to a point where they're like, oh my gosh, I've missed out on time with my kids that I really want. And I didn't really stop to think about that because I was so focused on work. So stepping back and thinking of longer term, thinking more in terms of what you really want and what has more meaning, as opposed to where can you get to as fast as possible.
Yeah, and I want to say one last thing about two subtypes of threes. Self-pressed threes, I've seen a lot of times developing a second career in something that they become entrepreneurs. So they have a career in a company, but they go have their own business thinking of the future. But then a workaholic person becomes even more so.
Yeah, they end up having two full-time jobs. Yeah.
Right. And then the social three, I can't even remember how many times I saw executives in organizations that were social threes that decided to have an academic job as a second job because they missed being on stage and having that social opportunity as being teachers.
It's a different kind of prestige.
Yeah,
which is
but
the
those
name.
Might be traps. That's
exactly.
My point. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think for one-to-one or sexual threes, they often get really good at supporting others' success and don't stop to think and get to know themselves enough to know what would be meaningful to them in their own success, because they tend to focus so much on other people and what others are doing or how others are reacting to them.
Yeah, very well.
So let's talk about type 4. What would you say are some of the tendencies and challenges for type 4s in their careers?
I think many 4s try to develop different career paths than when you compare to other people, like unique and career paths that are sort of one of a kind. So doing things that are not typical, changing areas all of a sudden, and I see that a lot for self-pressed 4s that sometimes change career paths at their best moments, and they don't know that there is a masochistic bias behind that. But also, trying to do something unique and new and different, and idealizing other careers, thinking that they will necessarily be better than the current one, but not always, so not looking well at what's happening now. So 4s, in my experience, are among the ones that change career the most. And it's like I'm never feeling content with what's happening with me.
And I know I've heard you say also that self-preservation 4s can stay way too long at a job that's not serving them.
That's the other
and
thing that happens.
Work really hard, harder than they need to or should, as part of that blind spot of masochism, where they're proving themselves, or they've gotten everyone used to the fact that they work way harder than they need to, but it's almost like they can't imagine leaving that, because they've sort of made themselves indispensable in the way of carrying so much of a heavy load for everyone.
Yeah, true. And I think sometimes 4s prioritize too much career opportunities that will allow them to be creative, but that will not necessarily be the smartest moves or the positions that will bring them the best compensation at
Right.
times.
They
Yeah.
may not think in terms of practicality.
Yeah.
They may think more in terms of being creative or expressing themselves
Yeah.
in a certain way.
Which
And
is fine, but it
yeah,
can't be all.
right. There's not, again, it's a lot about balance.
Mm.
And I think another thing with fours is they can tend to compare themselves a lot to others and maybe have a little bit of an inferiority complex around what's possible for them, and get disappointed if something doesn't happen that's good that they may want, and dwell a little bit on what they don't do well enough,
Right.
or get
Yes.
a little bit pessimistic in terms of their own opportunities, in terms of what's possible for them.
Right. Right. And sometimes they make decisions be out of comparing themselves with other people that are successful. But they are not. We are never the same as others, and sometimes comparing ourselves too much can be really dangerous.
Right. It's like, fours sometimes don't own their strengths in a realistic way,
Yeah. Yeah.
because of that comparing mind. They automatically go to, it's not as good as that person. Well, what if what you're doing is really excellent, and it's the comparison that
Yeah.
that skews your view of what's really true about what you're doing.
And as you always remember us, it's super important to talk about different subtypes here. Because, for instance, social force will sometimes stay stuck in suffering with a lack of career opportunity and almost paradoxically attracting lack of opportunities, while sexual force can go the other way and become excessively competitive, right? So
Right.
it can be very different for each subtype.
Yes, and I think sexual or one-to-one fours can create conflicts in their work environment, because of a need to be understood, to be seen as special,
Yeah.
to compete and win. And I've worked with some people who have problems with the sexual fours they work with and can't work through those problems because there's this cycle of getting angry about things and not being able to work through things
Yeah,
if
yeah.
they're not paying attention to what's going on at a deeper level.
Right.
And so I think that's important. But as you said, I think for social fours, it's a lack of ambition, dwelling in the negatives or what's missing or not good enough, that can really hold them back. And social fours, I think, really benefit from some sort of support or coaching,
Yes.
because it's often really hard for them to see the positives when it comes to themselves,
Right.
and really own it in a way that helps them move forward.
And like choose, it's useful if fours manage to analyze their career paths more rationally,
Yes.
not only emotionally.
Right. To get more analytical, to, in a conscious way, kind of go to the intellectual, mental level, in addition to needing to be more practical and sort of planning and taking steps, action steps. It's important also to really analyze different options and possibilities, and in a conscious way, not get too focused on how you feel about something, especially how you might feel about something, and that's a hard feeling.
Yeah, agreed.
So before we move on, I want to say just a couple of things about the type 4, a couple more things
Sure.
about type 4 growth opportunities. I think it's really important for them to notice what motivates them, and how you can get too caught up on definitions of success that are based in um, being understood by other people.
Yeah.
It's like in reference to how others see you, even though fours tend to be more authentic than say the twos and threes that can shapeshift and be more adaptable.
Right.
It's like they can also fail to adapt. Fours are real nonconformists.
Right.
And sometimes the truth teller in them, which is a good part of them, can get a little bit too sort of focused on telling the hard truths or bringing the hard news, and not create more of a balance such that they can have a hard time conforming. Although it's interesting, I've seen some fours get in really conformist careers and get stuck there. Like a four who, and this is often more with social fours, that they end up like say doing something that's a not very creative career, and almost because they don't want to have the hope of having something that's more fulfilling, so they stick with something that's really doesn't allow them to advance.
I've seen this a lot, but also at times I've seen that in a positive way, because I've seen fours becoming process oriented in a way that they were not dwelling in their own emotions only. They were more like being practical and making sure that things were working. And I saw them develop a lot when they were being more technical.
Yeah, good points. So what about type 5? Why don't you start us off talking about type 5 and career?
Oh, so many things, but I'll try to narrow down to the main ones. So I've seen fives become really technical, and with an unconscious hope that they won't need to interact as much with others, and going deeper in their areas of study, becoming specialists. But then at times losing opportunities for growth. Fives don't necessarily become ambitious in what they do. And the other thing is deciding their career paths according to what will not make them feel impatient with others, like when others demand too much or when they have to report to others too much. So there is a little bit of an avoidance of hierarchy for fives, because it's not comfortable to have someone always demanding something from you or following through, and also many people around you depending on you and coming ask you for things. So they have this bias of choosing a career that will be a bit more comfortable when it comes to having less interactions and less demands upon them.
Right. Yes. And I think all of that can mean sort of playing small and staying comfortable and automatically avoiding situations where they might have to collaborate more, or where they might feel overwhelmed by needing to work with others, or needing to display a wider range of skills than the technical expertise that they feel confident about.
Right. And I see fives jumping too quickly to conclusions like, I don't want that career promotion. I don't want that job. I don't want to have a life like that other person. But it's usually out of limiting their resources. And it's a trap at times for fives that conclude, I don't need to earn more money. I don't need to have more status. Perhaps for the five's inner growth, it would be good to go for it.
Right.
We usually say that a word that helps five in general growth and development is more, and not less.
Right. And they can tend to not be very ambitious. They can tend to close out options or not see them because of wanting to be able to exercise some degree of control over what happens to them at work.
Right. I must say, though, that I think that social fives are slightly different than that. Not completely, but I think they are more ambitious and they want a little bit more the positions that will bring them a little more status, recognition, and be seen as references.
I agree. I've seen some social fives almost have a little bit of an eight-ish feel to them at work, where they tend to be very direct, and they can sort of confront things. And I think part of it is that, like you say, that desire to be seen or have an impact, especially if they have a sense that they have a lot of clarity about how things should be done.
Right. And here's something else, B, that I observe in fives when it comes to career. Whenever they go to a new job, they automatically think how long they will stay in there. I see that all the time with fives. And they sometimes create a plan for that ends up being a little too strict. And it's a self, how do you call it in English?
self
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 realizing.
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes,
You have
exactly.
trouble with that phrase.
I do. I never remember this expression correctly, but I love it. So yeah, I see fives doing that many times, and it's a pity because they are not open to the flow of life and to opportunities. It's hard for fives to just go with what's happening.
Right. And I've heard you say something that I really liked before. You said that it's important to draw on the five's own strength in planning, but put it to use to your own well-being,
Yeah,
and not for comfort, but for
yeah,
possibility, for
right.
expansion, and allow yourself to think of the possibilities and new paths.
Yeah,
And again, like you're saying, seeing what's happening in life so that you can sort of have a plan, but that's more a little bit of a wider vision for yourself, and
exactly. Yeah,
includes, I would say, personal growth or professional growth opportunities. I
yeah,
think sometimes when um, fives get comfortable and have a sense, I've got everything under control,
yeah,
it's like, why would I change?
right.
And
Yeah,
so they can want to avoid change in
yeah.
general.
And I
And
think that speaking about this, positions that help fives self develop have to do with being a little less analytical and having less time to decide, needing to make bigger decisions without all the data, and leading people, being better people management, and true leaders that will speak up and influence. So these are things that are not natural for fives, but really help them develop.
right, right, right. So shall we talk about sixes?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
what would you say about sixes in terms of tendencies and challenges when it comes to career
I think the word is ambiguity. They want but don't. They go for it, but not as
or
much.
ambivalence?
Ambivalence,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I really see that happening with sixes. Also, be I see that whenever a career opportunity is becoming more concrete, they start questioning it. And many times, be I've seen sixes getting the opportunity and saying no for it because they want more time to think, but then they miss the momentum. So it's a pity. And what is behind that is a self boycotting tendency for sixes when it comes to becoming the authority and moving up vertically to positions. And I think that becoming the number two person is also a tendency for sixes, not becoming the number one.
When I've talked to sixes about their careers, what I notice is they can think of a lot of negatives,
Yeah,
and they tend to not think of themselves as pessimists, more as realists, but they can think of a lot of different things right off the bat that are limitations,
right.
either in the environment, in the organization, in the world, or in themselves. So
Yeah.
they can dwell on insecurities or what ifs, and have a hard time really allowing themselves to have a positive vision,
Yeah.
or really let themselves think of the opportunities that are out there for them, because they can so quickly think of reasons why something can't happen.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's a tendency. And another thing about career for sixes is that they become so beautiful in what they do that a little bit like ones, sometimes they become indispensable in where they are. So I can't lose you here. I can't put you in a bigger leadership role because without you, we're not going to do things right. So there is a tendency for sixes who are too competent, too cautious, and the ones that always prevent risks, not to move up at times because they are doing what nobody else does. So I can't lose you from this department.
Right, right, right. They're playing a role that is a lot about, safety
Yeah.
or troubleshooting, and that's not a role everyone can or wants to play.
Right, and at times there is a need for a major career change. That you need to rethink things in the macro level. So sixes find it hard. They take too long to say yes to this because of the tendency to doubt or wanting to think and think again or consult with other people, and they don't go for it. But there is, for many people, at least once in a lifetime, a need to rethink things, and that's hard for sixes.
I think they're by nature bad at self promotion,
Mm-hmm.
and they tend to not have an ambitious mindset. They can, when they do a self appraisal, they can see all the things that they're not doing well enough and
Yeah,
not own their strengths.
yeah. I think that sixes tend to be the worst when it comes to self-appraisal. They self-appraise themselves in ways that are worse than others appraise them.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's dangerous.
yeah. They can tell you what they're not good enough at all day, and they don't think in terms of what they're an authority in, or
Yeah.
what they're powerful at, or the ways that they can be a good leader, precisely because they tend to be more self-deprecating.
Right. And I also think that many times sixes decide about moving or not to a new job according to who their boss will be.
Mm.
And that is a bit limiting. And I think that they decide that in different ways according to subtype. So self-press sixes sometimes decide I'll go there because that boss is strong and will protect me. Socials see the boss and say they are inspiring, they are loyal, they are good in what they do, I can trust them, and then I'll go there, and sometimes I become eternally subordinated to that person. And then sexual sixes avoid many bosses that they think are not trustworthy, and that they will not confront, as they would confront too much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to certain people they don't want to tolerate,
Yeah.
because it's hard for them to hold back their assertiveness or their rebellious contrarian tendency.
Yeah, and reality is that, at least in corporates, people change bosses many times, and if you want to do and to have a sound career in the long term, you need to know that at times you're not going to have the ideal boss for you. But sixes sometimes can't cope with that. They are not as resilient to that as other people are, because they excessively value uh, who the other one in the authority position is.
Or they may project their own authority onto that person,
Yeah.
and not own their own, and not feel powerful enough to take their next career step that they actually really could take,
Right.
based on a more realistic appraisal of what they're capable of.
Right. And finally, I think that sixes sometimes play safe when it comes to career. They analyze what's the most conservative option in career management.
Right, right, exactly. So I think they need to allow themselves to be more ambitious,
Yeah.
get support from others to reflect back to them
Yeah.
what they're really good at, and
Or others who can help push them
yes,
into something new and bold.
yeah, yeah, and some people who can help them see the opportunities, not
Right.
just the derailers and the problems.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about type 7, and what are their tendencies and challenges in career planning and development?
Well, I think one pattern and problem is that they tend to move horizontally too much. They tend to want to try something that they haven't yet. So, I haven't done that, and I haven't done that.
And
So,
that looks interesting and fun, and
Exactly.
I think I could do it. It's
Yeah.
like they almost like the experience of doing something new, even if they're they're not that good at it, and then they develop that skill pretty
Yeah,
well.
but when
And
they do, they want to move again.
yes.
So they don't want to stay for too long at any given job, and they delay their vertical ascension in career a little bit too much at times. I do think that's a bit different for self-press sevens, who are a little bit more pragmatic and they have more ambition in getting to a certain point. But I think that in general, sevens derail in their careers because they want to move to different things. They don't stay, and they lose opportunities in the middle run.
And I think because they're so sensitive to feeling limited,
Yeah,
that like committing to a certain job or sticking with one role can feel like it's constraining their movement,
right,
and they can want to move on.
right.
Also, I think one of the things they are challenged by in the work setting is having the tough conversations,
Yeah,
especially when they are a leader with their direct report. They don't necessarily want to tell others what to do, just
yeah,
like they don't want to be told what to do or limited by the outside. So they can, like you said, they can move horizontally. They can want things to be flat or have the illusion that they're flat. And so not really develop their leadership qualities as much as they could,
right.
and stay with what's new or exciting or interesting or pleasurable, as opposed to what might really help them in a way develop through doing something more challenging but that gets them farther.
Right, agree. And I think that's specifically challenging when sevens get promoted, right? In the first moments when they get promoted, because they equalize authority, they deal with people on the bottom of the pyramid the same way that they deal with people on the top.
Mm-hmm.
And when they get a promotion, it's difficult for sevens to feel legitimized as bosses, because usually they used to be friends with all the people that
Yes.
they are now going to be the boss of. So at times that makes it uncomfortable for sevens, and they choose sometimes to say no to careers, especially social sevens, when that is the case. But um, at times when they move to that job, getting a promotion, they they don't go well in the first 6 months because of this. They take too long to be able to do what they need to do. That is many times hard conversations, hard decisions, because of the relationships that they do not want to damage. So there is a risk in career management after being promoted, on the seventh case, in the first months. This is why, in my view, it's so important to have a sound 3 month plan when you get promoted as a seven, and you become aware of the hard things that you are going to do.
Right, right. And I think that sevens are good at looking into the future. They like to
Yeah,
plan,
yeah,
but I think sometimes they may lack the focus
exactly.
of a sort of step by step career path
Yeah,
and the things they might need to do that might be kind of hard to
right,
develop and painful.
right,
And so the pain avoidance can cause them even to make a radical change for
right.
something new or more pleasant if
Yeah.
they get into a situation where they're feeling challenged. And instead of meeting the challenge, which might be good for their growth, they can want to find an escape route.
Right. This is why, I think one of the opportunities for a better career management for sevens is developing more insistence, a little more patience also, in going one particular way instead of having 10 or 12 different paths in my head, and also make more focused efforts towards a particular goal. And sometimes, especially sexual sevens, need to have friends or coaches pointing out when they out of the blue change their ideas and plans, like what happened with that plan that you had that's no longer here. So people who call them up should not forget and not move too quickly.
Right, exactly. What other career planning growth opportunities do you think sevens have when they do this more consciously?
I think that understanding that in some career paths, the work will not be as fun and pleasant than others, but those paths are necessary for you to achieve something else. So, using the technique of postponing a little bit the rewards, but focusing on rewards that will happen as something that will allow them to stay.
Yes. The people I know, the sevens I know who have been very successful in career planning and achieving what they wanted to, did exactly that. Like delayed gratification and
Yeah.
building that into the plan,
Yeah.
knowing that there will be a reward, because it helps the seven to really think of and be very, thoughtful about what rewards they want and what they're willing to give up on the way to get something maybe more in the long run.
Right.
I also think, they tend to be really good at generating a lot of ideas and options, but they may need help in sort of paring down the list of options
Yes.
to the things that make the most sense, to the things
Right.
that will be really more meaningful or reflective of what they really want. Because it can be hard to choose among options, and there can be an unconscious avoidance of certain situations and realities that are part of sort of wanting to keep all the options open.
Right. So they need the ability to say no to some of the opportunities that they envision.
Yes. And to think about moving more vertically, but being realistic about what that entails and seeing that as growth opportunity, learning to have the hard conversation, learning to manage people. Sometimes sevens really don't want to micromanage, and so they can be too hands off.
Right.
And so leaning into the kind of relationship challenges that come along with being a leader or moving more vertically that they may unconsciously avoid, and so move more horizontally or make more changes just going after the bright shiny object or the interesting opportunity. So we hope you've enjoyed this exploration of the challenges and growth opportunities when it comes to the 9 types and their career planning and professional development.
And we hope that this was an opportunity for you to truly rethink where you're heading to in your career.
So now it's time for our top 5.
What is our top 5 today, Bea?
Our top 5 is the least ambitious types.
Okay, so meaning that number 1 is the least ambitious of the 9, right?
Exactly.
And the 5th is in the middle.
Exactly.
So the 9th, if we had it, would be the most ambitious, but we won't talk about that.
Right. We're talking the number 1 would be the least ambitious of all 9. So what's your number 5 least ambitious type?
So my number 5 is type 7. I think that 7s usually they can be ambitious. They're medium ambitious, but because social 7s and all 7s in a way have this tendency to move horizontally, they end up not being completely ambitious. Like I have a friend, a very good friend, who decided not to go for any promotion in his career as a journalist because he didn't like to do the managerial things that came with being the boss. So I don't think that ambition is what really drives 7s. Pleasure comes first.
So I don't have 7s on my list. Spoiler alert. My number 5 is type 1. Because I think type 1s get more focused on doing the right thing, doing things well. They look more at the action steps, the tasks they're doing, and making everything better. And they don't really think about their own ambitions as much in terms of what they really want, what dreams they may have. They more get super responsible.
Right. Yeah. I fully agree. And this is why 1s are my 4th. So, for the very same reasons and things we talked about at this podcast, like one's becoming more technical, one's becoming more prone to just doing the current job better, and so on.
Yeah.
What is your third?
My
No, your
fourth.
fourth. Sorry. Yes.
My fourth is 5. And I was tempted to sneak a subtype in here and say self preservation 5,
Hmm.
because I think social 5s and sexual 5s can be a bit more ambitious.
I see. Yeah. And why?
Well, because I think self-pres fives in particular, but sometimes all fives, it's like they live little. They think
Mm.
small. They want to stay comfortable. They don't really think in terms of more and abundance and big and getting more for themselves, and especially getting more glory, with the exception of the social 5 and present company.
Okay. Yeah. So my third is type 6. I think that sixes many times become less ambitious than they should. And it depends a little bit, of course, on subtype. And many sixes occupy big jobs, on the top of the ladder. But many sixes who would have all the conditions to do so are not there. So I don't think that being ambitious is what truly characterizes sixes, and they can minimize their ambition at times.
So number 3 position, I also have type 6.
Wow, at least we agreed on one. Let's see.
Yes, I think they also tend to not really see all the possibilities for themselves. We talked about how they don't tend to have ambition to be the leader, the authority. They can really downplay their abilities. So, yes, I put 6 at position number 3.
Interesting. I think we are heading to for you to have one of the types in that in your second or first that I haven't mentioned, so I'm curious. But my number two is 5. I agreed with what you said, uh, but I think it's even more so. I think that fives tend to be less ambitious than they are. And even for me, as a social 5, I think that many times in my career, I was less ambitious than many people would have been in what I was doing, because there's something about doing big things without necessarily building something big and showing off or whatever. For instance, as an Enneagram teacher, and this is a bit personal, but as an Enneagram teacher, I think I did many more things than I ended up promoting or showing or benefiting even from. So I think that ambition becomes a blind spot, and ambition is a word that frightens fives because ambition is not far from abundance, and abundance is hard for fives.
Right. Yeah, you've convinced me. I think I might have put them a little bit higher on my list if I had it to do over.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of my second position, I put social 4,
Mm.
and I did slip a
Oh, I see.
subtype in there because
Yeah.
I think social 4s tend to really not be very ambitious and really focus on their inadequacy and what they
Right.
don't have and how they can't make it. And they really, in a way, get lost in those feelings. And
Mhm.
it's hard to have ambition for themselves and to
Yeah,
take
yeah.
action in service of a positive vision of what they can do.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you said. And this was the type I did not include on my 5 because I consider 4s as a whole. And I think that sexuals are super ambitious. And
And self-preservation for us can be ambitious also.
so it seems we agree with our number one. Should we say it together?
Yes. Type
Type
9.
9.
Yes.
Why is it 9 for you?
I just think they are so habituated to looking outside themselves and seeing others or seeing what's going on outside and really not putting themselves in the picture. Nines really don't tend to focus on their own desires. I mean, they have a hard time knowing what they want. They have a hard time creating an agenda for themselves and taking action on their own behalf. And so I think nines can, it's like forget to do career planning or fall into something and not have the ambition to, be seen or get what they want or make a mark.
Exactly. And I'll say something that has the purpose of pushing a little bit of the type 9 buttons. If you're a 9, please listen to this. As a 9, you may play small. And that means that you go for less, you don't value yourself as much. And that's sad because maybe you can do more and you deserve more.
I think you're really good at seeing the power in individual nines. And often when we're working with someone, the person is quiet or has a hard time owning their power. And you often really see it. And we often say that it's as if the 9 disperses their power out there through all the things they do for others in the outside world. And if they gathered up all those efforts and all their energy in their own service, they would be very powerful. And of course, anger is connected to power, and 9s can go to sleep to their own anger and their own power. So hopefully we are prodding some 9 listeners to getting a little bit more ambition and putting themselves more in the picture of their own life and imagining their success in a more active way.
Yeah, if you're a 9 and listening to this podcast, feel yourself being pushed by us right now.
Yes, in an encouraging way.
Exactly.
So that's our podcast. Thank you for listening, and join us again for our Enneagram 2.0 podcast, where we talk about all things Enneagram.